What happens when your own framework of gender, formed in a Catholic, largely binary imagination of transition, meets a tradition that has been naming and debating gender multiplicity for centuries? This episode explores that question through an interview with a non-binary trans Jew whose perspective both contrasts with and complicates my own. It's an invitation to listen with intellectual humility and to consider what becomes possible when our categories are allowed to grow. You're listening to Whiplash, a listener-supported podcast exploring Catholicism through the lens of queer liberation theology. I'm Max Kuzma, a transgender man and columnist for the National Catholic Reporter and board member of Dignity USA. Thank you to the paid Substack subscribers who make this work possible. You can sign up to be one of those if you go to maxwellkuzma.substack.com. Thank you for all the support. Today, I'm speaking with J.E. Reich, a Jewish, queer, and non-binary journalist and writer. It's a conversation that gave me the chance to step outside of my own Catholic framework and listen more deeply to another tradition. In preparing for this, I also spent some time with some of the Jewish writings that J.E. shared with me, and which you can check out in the description for this episode. I encountered rabbinic discussions that name more than two categories of sex and embodiment, alongside midrashic images of the first human as both male and female at once. What strikes me here isn't just the categories themselves, but the assumption that reality is more complex than the boxes we try to put it in, and that our theology has to be responsive to that complexity. When we allow for a more expansive understanding of gender, it opens up space for people to exist truthfully as reflections of a creation that was never as rigid as we assumed. These conversations aren't new, and they're not limited to one religious tradition. We also touch on J.E.'s writing on the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, specifically a piece they wrote for Vanity Fair, which I encourage you to also read and will also be in the description, and what it means to hold grief, memory, and identity together in the wake of violence. So this episode is really about listening and about what becomes possible when we're willing to learn beyond the limits of what we were taught. Without further ado, let's jump right into the middle of it. In Catholicism, there's like Catholic social teaching, right? And that is like basically surrounding your orientation towards other people, this idea of human dignity, caring for the least of these, like all those things. And then, as far as like, I guess it's difficult to separate it out from politically, because that's just been such a big push with Christianity in the US for the whole history of the colonial state of America. A lot of the time in the type of Catholicism that I was raised in, those issues that like abortion, just bodily autonomy in general, those issues were so reduced to, well, we have to protect the unborn baby, like those things were so politicized that some of those social teaching things were kind of put on the back burner. Like those things were not emphasized to me as like really as primary as they actually exist within the teaching. I'm going into some depth here, but I kind of what I'm curious about is like what you experienced as like the most important teachings that were like, what were the real focal points? Was it really like the simple sort of golden rule type of stuff, like love God and care about other people? Or like, I'm kind of curious in that arena, if that makes sense.
All right. Yeah. No, that's a really good question. I think, well, there were a few points that my religious education centered on. One, which I don't think was necessarily spelled out per se, but was like definitely an undercurrent in everything that we did, was the idea of like liminality, and that Judaism, like in Judaism, there's never a one true answer. You must always ask questions, because learning is such like a prerogative of Judaism. Like part of why, there's this midrash. A midrash is sort of not like a folk tale, but it's almost like a filler tale to sort of like explain certain things that might be missing between like one text and another, or like one fragment or another. It has many meanings, but there's this midrash that the filtrum, I think it's what's the filtrum right here, that little like indent between our nose and our mouth that we have is actually like right before we're born, we don't have that. Right before we enter this earth, we don't have a filtrum. And what it is that an angel touches it, because before we're born, we have all of the answers to life, to everything, kept inside of us. And when we're touched right here, this is the filtrum is the imprint that the angel leaves, and the angel sort of empties us of the knowledge that we had prior. And one of our primary goals in life is to learn and to sort of like reclaim the knowledge that we once had that was lost to us, to find it again. So one of the prerogatives of living is learning. And that's not just about ourselves, that's about other people, that's about other living beings, that's about the world around us, everything. So that was something that was definitely instilled in me as a kid. The other major teaching would be a tikkun olam, repairing the world. So this, I'm sure that you're familiar with this concept too, because it's like, it kind of, in terms of like, I don't know, like structuralism, it goes down to the idea of like the breaking of the cosmic vessel, right? Or even like, as I like to think of it metaphorically, like a metaphoric Big Bang in Judaism. So tikkun olam means to repair the world. And once you repair the world, which is done through acts of loving kindness. So it's like mitzvot, which are good deeds, but also mean commandments. Like what we as Jews are, specifically as Jews, are commanded to do or are meant to do. Then you can bring back the Mashiach, which, like, depending on what form of Judaism you subscribe to, could be a very literal Messiah, or could be a metaphorical one. So like in terms of like the idea of the cosmic vessel, for instance, what tikkun olam could actually mean is doing good deeds and through things like social justice and like acts of tzedakah, which are like, charity is sort of how it's translated, but it sort of means something slightly different than what we would consider charity. But yeah, good deeds. And you sort of like, because there is like a piece of like that broken vessel inside of each of us, like repairing the world is actually coming together and making that vessel whole. And once we have achieved that, that's achieving peace on earth. What I also really loved, and still do love about Judaism, is that there are a lot of indications within Jewish texts, both liturgical and philosophical, that speak to the idea that Judaism isn't the be-all, end-all belief system, and that many belief systems coincide at once, which doesn't mean that like Judaism is the only belief path out there and that everything else is wrong, that everyone else is like a heretic or just because they aren't following this belief system that they're bad in some way. I like in like our declaration of monotheism, like there are interpretations of it that say like, Hear, O Israel, this is my God and my God alone, which doesn't make us chosen in the sense that we're special. It makes us chosen in the sense that we're meant to be Jewish for some reason or another, the way that other people are meant to be Catholic, or the way that other people are meant to be like Muslim. And that, there's also like a set of laws called the Noahide laws that aren't like necessarily like they're not like codified per se. But it like the main gist is like don't be an asshole to other people, and it's like kind of they're mostly it's kind of like follows the rubric of like the 10 Commandments in the very general sense. Some people have tried to put like homosexuality as a sin into the Noahide laws. That's like very controversial, but like it's supposed to be what other people of other religions generally are supposed to ascribe to like make sure that they're all good, they're all set. And that's literally just the tenets of like any general belief system. Like, don't kill people, like, don't steal things, don't be a jerk. Like, yeah, those are, which are sort of the tenets of like any belief system, like that you come across. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm getting the vibe too that this was a very, like, I can see what you mean about it being like a more at least like an open environment, because if learning is such a high value, then curiosity is okay, and asking questions and not being threatened by other expressions of faith. I was thinking of like living in a pluralistic society and understanding that you can be part of that without it threatening your religious identity or your identity as a believer within that system. And I'm kind of curious if so I think of growing up in the 90s, and I think of the 90s as very much a time of encouraging that type of attitude in general. Like, I think of all of the social programming that we had, like all the PBS programming, like all the like Mr. Rogers, like who was from Pittsburgh, like that.
I have a Mr. Rogers celebrity meetup story. So yeah, he patted my head once. Yeah, so.
That's amazing. But like that type of thing, and then because like parallel to that, like in the grown up world, it's the 90s is also a time of possibility, because it's like, well, what can we do with technology? We don't even know. There's all these possibilities. Kind of contrasted with today, we have not only like kind of this Christian nationalist government, but also just it's like the bill is due for all the technological excesses. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, we're seeing the consequences both in human rights capacities, but also like in environmental ways. Whereas I don't know. So I guess where I'm going with all this, sorry for the long-winded response, but I'm kind of curious if that kind of resonates with you as like that time of possibility and in society kind of aligning with sort of an openness that you were experiencing within your religious environment. Is that an accurate take?
I mean, yeah, well, yes and no. I think that in most like streams of American Judaism, you're going to like a lot of the experience that I'm like speaking to is, unless it's like very insular, like extremist orthodox sects of Judaism, a lot of like what I say or like would be something that like most Jews would agree was kind of like their experience growing up. Most queer, I mean, I'm not going to speak for all queer Jews, and I definitely had it easier than some people did. But when it comes to like the forces that kept them in the closet for so long, I don't think a lot of them are going to say it was necessarily something that was religious in nature or like had to do a lot with religion. It would probably be like the stuff that kept a lot of us in the closet that would like just societal, like societal pressures, like of the late 90s and early aughts. I mean, like I graduated from high school in 2006, but I'm also a bit of an anomaly, I will say, because I came out as queer pretty young at 17. And then I was a popular hot girl. So coming out for me, like it at school was not the same type of experience that I think a lot of people had. Yeah. Also because I wasn't like obviously queer. As like, there are plenty of people I know who were bullied, especially like boys that I knew. Anyway, when it comes to sort of like our current socio-political environment, however, that's something that I feel like I've always been prepared for, because that's sort of, as a Jew, that's kind of how like the ebb and flow in history has gone. I mean, like, what I know that it's a little more complicated to say that like before like the rise of like the Third Reich, and yes, I am one of two siblings. My last name is Reich. I'm the first Reich. Poor Mandy is always the third. Anyway, yeah, just my parents came up with the best Holocaust joke. It's awesome. But like, it's a little, anyway, it's a huge generalization to say that like Weimar, Germany was like this bastion of like, progressiveness and like liberalness, before the rise of the Nazis. But like, you kind of have like people like Magnus Hirschfeld, for instance, being able to like openly like study like transness and like have this sort of like, yeah, whatever. But like, you know, you have like periods of like liberalness or periods of acceptance. But before that, you have like, I don't know, like the Dreyfus Affair in France, which was considered one of like the havens in Europe for Jews. Like this isn't very cohesive. What I'm saying is that like, as a Jew, you're always prepared for the other shoe to drop. That part of our history is knowing like what once happened can happen again. I mean, going back to why there's this sort of like culture of like asking questions and culture that sort of is very, very focused in on learning. And like part of that has to do with like how history has treated us in terms of like, what can you carry with you when you're kicked out of your home? Like where your home, where you've grown up your entire life, or if it's destroyed during a pogrom, or if you're like, for me, like, you know, like when your synagogue becomes like the biggest, like the site of like the biggest massacre of Jews on American soil, like what do you take with you? You take what's in your mind. You take what you've learned. You take a book. You take the Torah. Like that's something that you can easily carry, as opposed to like the possessions, like the house that you built that will be like destroyed and gutted, the clothes that you wear that will be shredded, the jewelry that you don every day that will be melted down and turned into something else for someone else's convenience. Like what you have in your head is what you can take with you. And I think that, you know, like I've been asked before, or I've heard before, like, did you ever think that what happened to you? And for this, I'm specifically talking about the shooting at my synagogue, the synagogue that I mostly grew up in. Like, did you ever think it could happen here? Or other people saying, I never thought it could happen here. I was like, I never thought for 1 second that it couldn't happen here, because history has proven that it has, and it probably will again, unfortunately. And we've seen that now. Like we've seen that since. It's a sad truth, but yeah, I mean, Judaism is also a lot about like laughing through the pain and learning how to live again through it.
It also makes me think, it makes me think a lot of being trans, specifically the type of resiliency that kind of, I'm sure you've heard of this concept of survivorship bias. So
yes,
I'll just define it just for like our listeners too. So like the idea of survivorship bias, like I always see it illustrated with like a warplane. And on the plane, you see all these dots, and the dots represent the data of the warplanes that came back after going on some mission. And it represents the places where the plane was damaged. So the idea is, okay, well, if we just reinforce those areas, then our planes will be totally fine. But the thing is, it's survivorship bias because we don't have the data of the planes that were destroyed. So we don't know exactly where those weaknesses, I guess, were. And this concept is often used like within the queer and trans community to talk about like we don't know the full depth and the full detail and the full stories of the people that we've lost for various reasons. There's like an inherent necessity. There's a necessity of resiliency for survival in the trans and queer community because of all the different things we face. And so I'm thinking of this because I'm wondering if that is something that resonated for you with Judaism as this faith and belief system that you were raised in, and then recognizing or coming into awareness of your own queer identity and understanding what that identity also means within these similar structures of resiliency. Like, is that a thing? Am I off base here?
No, I don't think you're off key, because I think, no, resiliency is something that's like, that is like essentially considered like a tenet of Judaism. It's also, but what becomes, I think what Jews have grappled with throughout the ages, and this is of course like context dependent, is knowing when it's safe to not just survive but thrive, which is something that I definitely have like connected with my own experience as a trans person, like surviving versus thriving, and like sort of like not even figuring out, because we should always be allowed to thrive, right? But like figuring out when it's safe to do so.
Yeah.
Or like figuring out how to do so in the first place, maybe is a better thing. So for me, I came out as non-binary in 2017. I started, and I identify as non-binary and transmasculine. I started my medical transition in July 3rd, 2019, still remember, because the next year I wanted to have a tea party, in like a little like English garden tea party. Of course, that didn't happen because of the pandemic. So I ended up, and of course, like during all of this is when, like I was, like in 2018, I was living back in Pittsburgh after living in New York for about 8 years, New York City, or Brooklyn rather. And that was when, I was really figuring out my trans identity when the shooting at my synagogue occurred and 11 people I knew died. And, I was writing about it and reporting about it. I was going through, a lot of changes in my life. I had a partner at the time, and like that sort of went to the wayside. There were also some other personal tragedies that I encountered. The deaths of two friends that were unrelated to the shooting. I started, relying on alcohol a lot, like to the point of like severe self-medication when I had been abstinent from it beforehand. So I was, I was just sort of like a mess during this period. And my partner at the time, my ex, but like my partner at the time, left right after I started medical transition. I don't think the two were necessarily unrelated. That's another story entirely. But like I felt like my transition, which was ironically the only thing keeping me moored. And of course, like then you have the pandemic, and I was able to sort of like transition, but in this place of like isolation, like in this very contained space, and sort of figuring myself out, and like figuring out like what does it mean to not only be Jewish now, of course, because you had the rise, like, which is still an exponential rise of anti-Semitism. This is nothing to, I'm not going to go into anything regarding like the Israel, like the conflicts between like Israel and Palestine. I will say that I am anti-occupation, so that can give you a very good idea of how I feel about the genocide in Gaza right now. But aside those politics aside, being like, the exponential rise of Judaism, of anti-Semitism in this country, along with the exponential rise of transphobia in this country, and the anti-trans. So I find it very interesting that I'm sort of like, in a way, came of age again, during like a time filled with strife that has continued to be and has continued to be. So, and it's strange because like my, the real crux of my transition, or at least like sort of like the beginning of my medical transition, came at a time where I was just trying to survive. And for years I was just trying to survive. And it's only now that I can say I'm starting to thrive, not because things have gotten easier, but because I've become more resilient, and because I have realized, like, look, this is how the ebb and flow of history. This history does not dictate whether or not, it doesn't dictate my personhood. It doesn't dictate whether or not my name will be remembered or not, or whether my words will be forgotten or not. I can thrive in spite of it.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely feel like there's a word I'm thinking of. There's I think surviving out of spite sometimes, where it's like there's so much that's trying to like crush me, but like I will survive because, like, in spite of all these things going on, what I know to be true is I know things about my personhood that are true. I know those things. Those are the things that I can embody, that I can live in. Like, I often think of it too, like living in rural Ohio where I live, with so much land and so much beauty and so much nature. There's still pollution. There's still the effects of climate change and things like that. But it is a more connected to the earth type of life. And I think a lot about how I have all these anxieties of seeing headlines. I have the anxieties of knowing, the consequences of transphobia politically for the country and how it could impact me and all those questions and all those things. And I think often about, like, yes, I need to have that awareness to kind of know what's going on, but also, what is in front of me and what is before me in the present moment is this opportunity to like exist and be connected as myself, like with the earth, like in this moment, I can take care of the earth in the ways that I can, I can go for a walk and I can pick the trash out of the ditch as I'm walking. I can be with my horses or with my dogs, and and in my mind and in my experience, it's not like there's this one scorecard of like good versus evil, and every individual action is like we're making this tally. But instead of that, it's I can take these actions that are true and real and connected, and that means something, even if I personally, as one person, am not able to like solve all of these other crazy things that are going on. Yeah.
That's like, I mean, you kind of just like described like an aspect of tikkun olam, like repairing the world. And like, there's this tractate from the Talmud, that's in Hebrew, it's tzedek, tzedek, tzedov, which means justice, 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 3 justices, you shall pursue. And justice in that sense can mean exactly what you're describing. It doesn't have to mean, like Judaism in many ways is sometimes cast, especially like in sort of like the idea of like a Judeo-Christian perspective, which is also, there's a the term Judeo-Christian is also very problematic in a lot of ways.
Totally.
But just because it makes it sound like Judaism is like Christianity light, which it isn't. These are 2 separate belief systems. But like, God in like in this sort of like Judeo-Christian lens is cast as like from the Torah or from the 5 books of Moses is sort of cast as this like vengeful God. So you get like things like justice, justice, justice you shall pursue. And it sounds like it's an act of vengeance or an act of like, I don't know, something malevolent. Retribution. And Judaism is like the Judaism that I know, the Judaism that most people know is quite the opposite. It's about repairing the world. And like, you can do that through justice. You can do that through like, through social justice. You can also do that by just caring about your fellow human being, by picking that piece of litter out of the ditch, by remembering somebody's name. That is also a form of justice. And that is also a form of doing good in the world and healing.
And another thing I wanted to ask you as well is, I'm curious. So you talked about the main maybe barrier for your own understanding in queer and trans identity a little bit was kind of a culture of heteronormativity. Like that was kind of just expected. That was the way things were framed. So that just made it more difficult maybe for you to kind of find your place within things. And
there's I should have also like elaborated a bit further, like on especially maybe it has to do with like post-Holocaust survivorship, maybe not, but in Judaism, it predates it. You can find it in like Jewish literature, for instance, especially in the sort of Jewish American landscape. There's this idea of, I guess, like excellence that you must pursue. It's not even akin to, it is part of like the model minority paradigm or schema. You find that a lot in like AAPI communities, for instance. Right. And we also, it's like important to, I think, point out that the whitewashing, and I see that with like heavy quote marks, just because not all Jews are Ashkenazi, not all Jews are white. So like the idea of like Jews as part of a mainstream whiteness is a very, very recent phenomenon. So, and we're kind of seeing that reverse course a little bit with the rise of anti-Semitism, viewing being Jewish as like, again, not all Jews are white, but like as dirty white. So there's an interesting phenomenon that's currently happening about like what exactly the Jew is in a two-tiered racial hierarchical system that is like how the U.S. views race. That's just an aside. But
interesting.
But going back to what I was saying about the model minority, that's something that definitely plays into, I think, like visions of that are very heteronormative of what Jewish parents want their kids to like aspire to or to be, and that includes creating and fostering a Jewish family. That the parameters of what that means have definitely expanded since I was younger. I've done a lot of work on that front. When I used to write for the Jewish Forward, not as a contributor, not as like a staff writer. I definitely discussed this a lot. When I wrote for them, I wasn't out as trans, I was out as queer. So a lot of it is sort of like engaged to that. Basically like, I was told like the big thing wasn't like when I was growing up was, dating was completely fine. But if you dated somebody who wasn't Jewish, like that was going to get you in trouble, which is exactly what happened with my middle sister. Like her first like real boyfriend was like this like lovely like Catholic kid. And my mom, it was like, it was like my sister was dating like a guy in like a motorcycle gang. It was like he was a perfectly like lovely kid who had like an emo band and like looked like he was like he looked like he was like an extra out of the OC, and like worked at a Hollister, like Sean. His name was Sean. Lovely guy. But my mom acted like it was like, I don't like end time. we don't even have the same concept of end times, but it was like the end of times. Like, oh gosh. Meanwhile, like I'm like online, like figuring out like my sexuality while secretly dorkily reading like Harry Potter fan fiction, which like, yeah, that was my big secret. I was really into Harry Potter fan fiction and nobody could know. Yeah. So, so it's funny that I ended up like years after I came out, my mom didn't meet like my first like queer partner. And I dated like exclusive, like at the time I identified as a lesbian. I dated exclusively like women, throughout college. And, my mom didn't meet my first partner until, I was a senior in college, not because, and I think mainly the big thing was that she wasn't Jewish. It's not that she was a woman. Yeah, my mom has come around a lot, and my dad was always fine with it. My parents were divorced when I was very young, so and they had two very culturally different experiences when it came to Judaism. You know, like I'm newly married now to a non-Jew. We had like a mostly traditional Jewish wedding with some fun elements from like her cultural like background thrown in. Both of my baby sister, who's also queer, she's engaged to like a wonderful woman. They're getting married in a few months. My parents were really, really, really happy about having two weddings so close together. But she's marrying a Jew. My sister has been married to a Jewish guy for a number of years. Like they kind of like all now understand that the idea of family and what it means to raise a Jewish household does not have to adhere to one specific heteronormative model. I think that was the hardest thing.
More expansive.
Yeah. And I think that was the hardest thing, not for my dad, but for my mom to like really get a hold of, to really grasp. And it wasn't just her. I think it was like very much of the time. This is like pre like equality marriage. Like this is before like this was really in the zeitgeist. I mean, now she's like, I've attended PFLAG meetings. I don't know. She like when she lived in Miami, she was in the Miami Pride Parade. It's like that, you know, that sort of kind of narrative. She's changed. The community has changed. There are still some things that I think, are heteronormative in like what is like the typical like, modality of a Jewish upbringing, which is like being like, you know, like being a part of like a brick and mortar synagogue. Some of those things are changing, which is like another topic unto itself. Just because like the parameters in which those modalities can exist have changed. I think from my experience, what it means to be Jewish and what it means to like live a Jewish life and live in a Jewish way, like has become a lot more multifaceted, which doesn't surprise me when it comes to, you know, a belief system where you get more questions than you do answers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was just bringing it up because I was curious if, you know, as you journeyed into your queer identity and trans identity, I was curious if I can see how you might have had experiences of finding queer community separate from Jewish community where you were like, oh, I'm starting to feel seen, or I'm starting to see possibilities that I didn't see before. But then I'm also thinking it was probably complicated for you with being non-binary because there can still be roles and expectations, yes, within queer dynamics as well. So that's what I was curious about.
It's funny. It's mostly. I mean, I went to college in Boston. I live in Boston again. My college had like a pretty big Jewish population, very, very large queer population. But I didn't, my Judaism was sort of like a very private thing. Yep. And I didn't seek out, even though there were a lot of Jews, like, and I had Jewish friends at my college, like I didn't necessarily like seek out a Jewish community. That changed when I moved to New York, and I found that more often than not, queerness and Jewishness like worked in concert, or like there were pre-existing communities that like encompassed both, and in a way that was like very like inclusive and ever expanding. So when I say like, I you know, like I've talked a lot about how a lot of, even though like a lot of the Jewish spaces that I grew up in were progressive, they were still like highly heteronormative. That wasn't the case for my like for like the spaces that I've encountered since. And this isn't just specific to New York. A lot of Jewish like grassroots organizations tend to be led by queer Jews. Like, and we're not just like some of them are political, but some of them like are like, I'm blanking on the name of one of them, but there was this big one in Brooklyn where they didn't have like a brick and mortar synagogue, but they would do like, people would like essentially like volunteer their homes or like their spaces or like community spaces to do like Kabbalat Shabbat, which is like a, for those who don't know, is a service that you do on Friday night, which marks the beginning of Shabbat or the Sabbath, and Shabbat ends like the following evening. And after the services, you usually have like a big meal and like a lot of like dancing and like music and just like a lot of fun. So like those social spaces were heavily queer. Like I dated at least one or two people in those social spaces, who I still call friends today. I found more so than ever, like as I grew more into my Jewish, I mean, I'm always growing into my Jewish identity. I mean, it's inescapable from who I am, or inextricable, maybe inescapable too. But it's the same with my transness. As I grow into both of these identities, I find that they're starting to sort of like coincide more than split apart, which I think that's a very fortunate position to be in. And I feel like a lot of people, I know a lot of people who are religiously observant, tend to have like religious trauma. And an ex-partner of mine is an ex-evangelical, now, as far as I know, is still like Mennonite, which of course is a very expansive term unto itself. And sort of has the same kind of experiences, as far as I know, that like as now a practicing Mennonite, that I do as a religiously observant Jew and somebody who's very culturally Jewish. I found that I've just been incredibly fortunate in the sense that my transness and my queerness have been bolstered by my Jewishness and vice versa.
Yeah. Totally.
And I've also found, like places like what's also nice is that I've seen, I think this is like a very Jewish, like Yiddishkeit thing, that if there isn't a space, you make a space. So, I saw a lot of that in New York, especially. Like there's like there's this event that happens nationwide called the Matzah Ball. And this has been going on for decades. And it's essentially like like Jews have nothing to do on Christmas Eve. So why don't we get like a bunch of like young singles together and have like a big party? And so they can meet each other and like do, like whatever. And maybe if it's a match, it's a match. It's very like, sorry, I went into my Yenta voice. So like those were very like heteronormative spaces. So it's like, you could I've never been to one. You could feasibly go to one and have fun, but it's like the purpose of it is like very much like, it's almost like a mating ritual. So instead, like if like a number of years ago, a guy named Jason Littman created this thing called this org called Hebrew. And he did his own matzo ball, but it was for queer Jews. Mostly it was at first, like at the beginning, it was oriented mostly towards like cis gay men. But as like I mean, the last time I was there, like the landscape had definitely changed. Like I would go there every year because what else did I have to do on Christmas Eve when I lived there? And it was always just like a really good time. And it's just like having both like a queer and a Jewish experience, like uniquely queer and uniquely Jewish at the same time. And it was just like this really great sense of community, and also very inclusive towards like people who aren't Jewish too. Like you didn't have to be Jewish to attend, but it was.
I'm really glad that you have had that experience. Like for me, with finding a progressive Catholic community, like that part was a surprise to me that existed. And then when I did find it, it really does mean a lot to have a space where you don't feel like your queer identity and this religious background. Like for me, some of it is cultural as well with Catholicism. I have felt many times that it's not something I could ever eject from my life because it's just kind of part of me in that way. So I'm glad that you have had opportunities and avenues and ways to incorporate both in ways that feels really natural. But I think I'm like focusing on the non-binary identity a little bit because I know that that's something. So I'm very binary trans, but I get a lot of questions about non-binary people, and I think it's because it's one thing for people to kind of conceptualize this idea of, okay, binary transition. That's one framework to understand. But when they are introduced to the idea of non-binary, sometimes they just have a million questions about like how it even works. And the way I learned to understand it, because I had to challenge my own perceptions or my own understanding of what gender was, because like I was having this binary experience, so it would have been really easy for me to become sort of rigid in this idea of, well, transition is only binary. But then when I encountered non-binary, I was like, okay, how do I incorporate this into my understanding so I don't become rigid? What I had to do was kind of start to ask questions and learn that it's not like non-binary is 1/3 thing that you can put in one box and think of in one way. Non-binary is essentially a space, a way of indicating that there's a different relationship to gender than a binary experience. So it can be many different things. It can be someone who doesn't relate too much to many aspects of their assigned gender, but then wants to dabble in the other side, right. Simply stereotypically. Or it could be somebody who doesn't relate to either of the binary options. And so non-binary is a space that feels better because it's outside of those pressures. Right. I know I'm telling you things that you already know. I'm just kind of talking through like how I had to catch up with this.
Yeah. It's interesting because when I came into my non-binary identity, I think when it had in relation to Judaism, it seemed like a complete non-issue. And that's because of how I already, as an adult, as somebody who was learned somewhat in Jewish theological texts, I'm not a Talmud scholar. I'm not going to pretend I am, but I do have some background and some knowledge in these texts from whatever. In what I did grow up knowing is that according to the Talmud, I think it's the Talmud, Judaism recognizes at least 7 different genders. So a lot of those are aligned with sex and biological sex characteristics because of that was what the construct was then. But then you remember Judaism is a living, relies on a living, breathing text. So it was sort of in concert with knowing that Judaism already recognized that gender isn't a binary at all. There are also ways in which the story of Adam and Eve can be interpreted that that they were at one point a non-binary entity, and that and that meant that there is room for other genders to exist within sort of these like what in this context would be like polarity, these polarities. So that kind of like was already in the back of my mind. So I knew like already, again, like my religious and cultural experience, because I mean, Judaism is also an ethno religion. It's not like cut and dry, like, religion. I mean, once you're a Jew, you're always a Jew, even if you convert, like, right. Not to say that people who convert, like, not trying to, like, you know, rain on their parade. Like, it's a sincerely held belief system, whatever it is. But I mean, yeah, anyway, but just sort of backtracking to the idea, there's only one time in the Torah, like the actual 5 books, in that anything relating to cross-dressing is mentioned. And it's in Devarim, which is Deuteronomy. And essentially I can't remember the exact passage, but essentially it's like a woman shall not dress as a man would, blah, blah, blah. Centuries later, a Talmud scholar named Rashi, who's really integral when it comes to like Talmudic scholarship, and just just as a theologian, he's like an incredibly like imperative figure. He lived in, I think, the 11th century in France. And like his main gig, like I love his main gig was like running a vineyard, and his side hustle was like, I don't know, I'm just gonna read some Talmud for fun, and also like make sure my daughters are super literate and Talmud scholars, like just for funsies. I love it.
There you go.
Rashi was pretty cool. Anyway, so when he interpreted it, when he looked at it, he was like, this is obviously only meant in the context of like fraudulence. So if one were to dress, this is talking about dressing in a fraudulent manner. So what does it mean to be a man and a woman? There isn't like any sort of like gender essentialism attached to that. It's what it leaves room for the idea of like self-identification. So I'm not dressing right now. What I'm dressing as is not fraudulent, like, because this is an expression of who I am. What would be fraudulent is to dress in a way that with the intent of doing harm to another or to lie to another human being. So really, like, this is me being my full self, and me dressing, like, me being non-binary and me expressing that is the truest form of being a Jew that I can be, which is something that, I mean, that's my own little tack on at the end, but like, that's a logical conclusion. That's kind of, I love that there's that room for interpretation, and there's always that room for growth. So that's sort of how I always viewed it. I can send you some links to some like really great essays for beginners about it from scholars that are much more well versed than I am, that are like easy for people who are non-Jews to sort of like to parse and understand. But yeah, like I never felt like my identity ever got in the way, one part of my identity ever got in the way of another, and vice versa. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Like, I think I'm less trying to ask about those two as conflict, and more of just in general, trying to understand your non-binary identity, especially like in a very heteronormative culture, period. Like how the experience was for you. Because you also talked about like finding queer identity first, and then kind of going into gender later.
I guess like, well, it's funny like you asked that question, because I think that's something that's ever evolving. I'm still trying to figure out myself. I don't know, like I mean, I also sort of I knew that like I knew the idea of like, I'll go back to what I said earlier on during our conversation about like how I never felt like I was born in the wrong body per se, but it felt like certain things were kind of off. And I feel comfortable like talking about like the more like medical aspects. Like, I really felt like the thing that made me feel the most dysphoric were like my boobs. Like, I hated the fact that when I went through puberty, hated the fact that I was growing them, like, could not stand them. I felt, but like aside from that, like I felt like more of myself in any other way. So like having top surgery, for instance, was like obvious to me. But, you know, like, and of course, like, don't ask people about like their body parts and whatnot, just like really full on blanket statement. But like for me, like, taking testosterone seemed like also like a logical step, because I never felt like, you know, like, I don't know. I remember being like a child and, like I really, really was into Aladdin at the time and wanting to like smile like how Aladdin smiled. And I wanted to be like how Aladdin was. And like, I like, and like seeing myself as Aladdin as opposed to seeing myself as myself, if that makes sense. I would like think I would attach myself to these, more or less like masculine figures, in terms of like how I wanted to look, or more androgynous figures like Shane and the L Word, not necessarily emulating like Shane's personality or like fuckboyishness, but like, but the other, like that sort of like androgyny or something akin to it. So when it came to like testosterone, I knew that was something that I wanted to be a part of my journey. I didn't know like to what degree. So I've been on like low doses of testosterone now. Like now I've like, it's a bit upped, but like it's hard to describe. It was sort of like going through it, and going through that process was sort of me like discovering myself again. And realizing like these pieces, like the Aladdin thing, for instance, that I mentioned before, like they finally started to make more sense, like in retrospect. And so it wasn't like ever like feeling like I was born in the wrong body. It's just like feeling like there were these disparate pieces of myself that that didn't quite gel together. And and transition as a form of discovery was the way in which that finally happened. If that kind of answers.
No, that makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
And it also makes sense to me within the context of, I think how you put it is perfect, because I think that, in pursuing things that resonated with you and with your gender, it makes sense that, things that you had experienced before that, you know, kind of were just floating there or kind of didn't know how they were integrated. It makes sense that you would start to feel more integrated, because you're kind of, you're finding the story of you that makes the most sense. Maybe is that
yes. No, I'd say, yeah. You put it better than I could. Yeah.
I thought about it a lot too, in different ways, even though I'm not non-binary.
Yeah. No, it's, and you know, like, I mean, it is definitely, I can't say that like, once I came out as non-binary, like everything around me fit together. Like there were certain things that I did have to contend with, like, other people in my life, not like being misgendered for, like I had, at least one close family member. I mean, you could tell, like, you can always tell when somebody's trying to gender you correctly, but, not doing like, but still like, they're still trying, but they're not getting it right. But the, you know, like the sentiment is there. There's always a difference between that and just not trying at all. So I gave this particular family member a number of years, like at least 3 or 4 years to like come, you know, try. And I would do things like send them, like worksheets, or be like, and I don't really, this is something that I would say, like, you can maybe suggest to like, I don't know, like coworkers or something. I don't really recommend it for like close family members or friends, just because it feels like, I don't know, it just gives me the ick a little bit. And I can't believe that. I think that is the first time I've ever said that phrase before. But it's like pretend that like I have a little like mouse in my pocket. And so when you're referring to me, you're referring to me and the mouse in my pocket, like, or like a pet in my pocket or something like that. Yeah. It's just like, it's a tool that works if you need it to work. I just think it's like a little, if it's somebody that you have like a meaningful relationship with. Yeah. I mean, going back to the story, to the murder story of that family member, I had to basically estrange myself from that family member for, it wasn't a super long time. I want to say maybe a little over half a year, where I could finally like get some room to breathe. And it's just because I was just like so angry so much of the time when I spoke with them. And it was like they would either find a way to include my gender in everything or render me genderless, which isn't the same as being non-binary. I mean, there are people who are agender, but that's not me. There was
and also when you as a person are first starting your transition or using different pronouns or whatever the case may be, I fully understand feeling extra sensitive because it's like this is, I'm asking you to accompany me on this journey. And if you are, antagonistic or not trying, like, kind of like you said, like, all I expect is at least you to try, even if you've known me for all these years, you've known me this way. I understand it's going to be difficult, but I'm asking for that effort.
Right. And it's like, of course, then you're like, so many trans people are mindful of like the caricature or like the stereotype of like the angry trans person who's somehow a monster, but also a snowflake. Yeah. Like ridiculous. It's like how Jews are like pinko commies that run the banking system. I don't know. No. Same kind of like ridiculous, just like polarities. Keep using that word. But it's, I'm always like mindful. It's like, and it also kind of like resonates with like how I was socialized as like somebody who was assigned female at birth, of like not to take up too much space, not to be too angry, it's like that thin line. Like, of course, I'm not going to get like upset at somebody who's like works in food service, like who's like my server at a restaurant who misgenders me. Like, they're not going to be a major part of my life, right? Now, if that food service worker were to say something transphobic to my face, like, that's a different story, and that doesn't have to do with gendering. That just or misgendering. That has to do with being a decent human being. But like, if it's a close family member or friend who's like purposely, because like when you're not trying, it does become like purposeful at a certain point. Like, that's when I'm going to get upset, Yeah. And I don't envision myself living in a world where I will ever be gendered correctly, really, when I walk out as a me-shaped me. Like, my partner and I joke, my spouse, she's a cis woman and also queer. And we joke like, oh, when we go out, we confuse people because I look like a twink or a twunk. I'd like to think twunk, but probably a twink. And she looks like an androgynous lesbian. And then when we kiss or like hold hands or like are all like, lovey-dovey in some way, it just like confuses the hell out of people. Like, they're like, what? I thought, okay. Yeah. And it's, I don't know what the point of that story is, other to say it's really funny when that happens. But like, I don't expect anybody to like really get it right on the first try, but just to try, or to like maybe think of the world in a more open-minded or more expansive way. Yeah, exactly. In a more complex way, I think is always a good thing to ask of people. I don't think it's ever too much. I think it's when, I think it makes for a better world too.
Yeah, so I note that in this conversation, we have covered a lot of ground.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I feel like we could keep talking about many, many things. We are running out of time. So as we get to the end here, I just wanted to throw it to you and see if there's anything that we, touched on a little bit that you wanted to tie up, or anything that you want to leave people with. You can also use this time to promo anything, like if you have, you want to direct people to a website or to your Instagram or anything like that. It's kind of a catch-all end time.
If you want to read my writing, I write under J.E. Reich. My last name, Reich as in bike. I have also, I've written for places like Vanity Fair, Insider, Daily Beast, Slate, runs the gamut. Right now, my current gig is writing about TV and movies, so you can catch me over at movieweb.com. You can follow me at J.E. Reich Writes on social media. I've been pretty... I don't post nearly as much as I used to, but occasional poster. And sometimes I say, something funny or something that sounds like an insufferable dad joke. I'm currently working on a memoir, so hopefully you'll see excerpts of that soon. That's all I can think of for now. I'm a fiction writer, so you can find my short stories again under the same name.
Fantastic. Well, and I just want to say thank you again for your time, and I really appreciated having you on the show today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Different traditions carry distinct histories, conceptual languages, and modes of interpreting human experience. And learning about those differences can refine rather than unsettle our understanding. I'm grateful to J.E. for the clarity and generosity they brought to this conversation, and for the ways this dialogue invited me to think more deeply about the contours of my own formation. Thanks for being here with us today. I'll see you in the next episode.